All right, got a cool episode for you today. Simon Gerszberg from the analytics company Shot Quality joins the show to discuss why this Heat Sixers series has been such an outlier from an analytics standpoint, and in what way the Sixers have actually had the advantage for most of the series, and how the Heat flipped that in Tuesday's win. Finally, we take a look at who has the advantage in Game 6 and to win the series. This episode is all about process, not results. It's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. However you may be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or wherever you get your podcasts, thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. And I'm here with Simon Gerszberg, the creator of Shot Quality, which is a basketball analytics company, among other things. And we'll get into all of those things that Simon does with Shot Quality later in the show. And we'll get to what stands out about this Heat Sixers series from an analytics standpoint in a second. But first, Simon, welcome to the show. Can you just describe for us the concept of Shot Quality?
Totally. So the simplest way to put it, it's process over result. A little back, I worked for the Colgate University men's basketball staff, and they believed in this idea of process over result for everything. They didn't care if they missed 30 open threes for their best player. They cared that they were getting 30 open threes for their team. And that's the biggest thing with Shot Quality. It's basically totally independent of individual game results because there's so much variance in the game of basketball. Most people understand like make or miss on three-pointers,
right?
But especially with more and more three-pointers taken, there's just more and more variance in the game. So there'll be some games where the shot quality score, where we quantify the quality of possessions using over 90 different variables, which I'll probably go through with you. There could be like 35 to 40 point differences just because the game of basketball has so much variability. But the thing that's so important about it is when you evaluate things from a process standpoint, it's going to be more predictive than from an outcome standpoint, at least in a smaller sample. So like, for example, when Duncan Robinson misses 10 threes in a game, that wouldn't be very likely to occur again, just based off Duncan Robinson's overall career three-point percentage. So we're basically extrapolating a player's career and season stats, and then honing in on that to then predict the future based off the looks they got in that one game sample.
Well, I like what you do on Twitter because you break it down in really simple terms in that, hey, here's what the actual score was. Here's what we predicted the score to be based on the overall shot quality of both teams. And I think for this Heat Sixers series, that stuff really stands out because the Sixers shot so poorly in games 1 and 2. And then the Heat shot so poorly in games 3 and 4, missed 51 of 65 threes between those two games, which obviously anybody could say, well, that's probably not going to happen again, right? But what I like is that you had it broken down to the fact that, hey, like, even if the Heat would have made a normal amount of threes, and this is just all based on your Twitter charts and things that you put out there, which again are really easy to understand, like the Heat probably still would have lost those games, but they would have been much closer than what they were, especially game 3, which was a complete blowout. What stands out to you about this Heat Sixers series?
Yeah, you were getting at it a little bit. It's the three-point variability in this series and just how much luck there've been. So in the two games that Philly lost, the Heat shot 49% from three. I believe both games. I might have flipped that actually around. But essentially, there's been two games where one team just shot extremely incredible from three, and then the other team didn't. It seems like that's because every game's essentially been a blowout in that way. And what's so fascinating about it, the only game of this entire series where the shot quality score, actual score, lined up with the same team winning was last night. So that was the first night where basically the Heat not only dominated the actual game, but got significantly better quality of possessions. The other two games, the first two games of the series, it was the opposite. So like the Heat got they got really good looks, but they weren't expected to shoot as well. And same with the Sixers. Even with them beat out, they were still getting high quality 3-point shots. It's just they weren't falling in that game. Like Danny Green went 0 for 6 in one of the games. Pretty good overall career shooter.
Right.
Maxey had some off games, and yeah.
So when you say that the first game where things actually lined up with the result last night, that says to me that, okay, Miami's defense finally actually performed to the level that we expected them to perform based on the regular season being one of the top 5 defenses in the league. Because Philly was getting good looks, I thought, in games 1 and 2, but you get a little bit slower of a James Harden, not quite as an effective Joel Embiid. Credit, wear and tear, credit Miami's defense, wherever you want to put it, probably a little bit of everywhere. But finally, it feels like the Heat's defense stepped up in the way that we expected them to.
Totally. Yeah. That's exactly what it felt like last night, too. I mean, they forced tough 3-point looks for the Sixers. The Heat pretty much all season have had one of the best in not allowing shots at the rim. No, they allow, in not allowing shots at the rim,
Right.
but allow a ton of threes.
Right.
And the Sixers are a really good 3-point shooting team overall over the course of the season in terms of the quality of looks they get. When teams hone in on Embiid, they get a lot of open threes for guys like Danny Green, Tyrese Maxey. So it was interesting to see how that's played out in the actual quality of possessions compared to results, because as we know, sometimes 3-point variance can take a major play in just the factor who's winning the series and everything like that.
Now, I know all this stuff is proprietary and you got things that you need to take care of, but can you give us some insight in what goes into the formula of shot quality and everything that we're talking about here?
So the biggest factor that I could say about shot quality and how individualized for each player in the NBA. So when Jimmy Butler takes a post-up fadeaway that he's probably like the 95th percentile in, that's going to be a higher quality shot than when Julius Randle, I'm a Knicks fan, takes a post-up deep mid-range fadeaway.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. So that's like the biggest factor, is that everything is individualized. The other variables in play are, for example, the quality of the interior defense they're going up against, the overall shot selection. So there's obviously the individual shot making of the player, but guarded versus open. Some players are better at open shots than guarded shots. And then other variables are like offensive rebound probability. So depending on how good of an offensive rebounding team they are, what's the percentage on each shot attempt that they're going to get the rebound. Basically, I know I'm tossing a lot of stuff. The main thing is we're actually not even shot quality. We're really possession quality. And that's the biggest thing that I try to, when I'm talking to coaches or anyone, to make sure that they understand is there's a significant difference, because if you turn over the ball 30 times in a game, it doesn't matter how good of your shots were on the other possessions. You're still probably going to lose. And on the possession quality metric, you're not going to come out well, even if you're getting incredible looks. So even turnover is obviously a major factor.
And so you actually expected a little bit of a regression after the first couple of games of this Philadelphia series. Is that right? A regression from the Heat.
Yeah. Yes. And it kind of placed in the 2 games they lost in Philly. But then last night it was like average. So from the 3-point line, that I remember that was a major thing for the Heat, just because they shot, I believe, like, I can pull up the numbers. It was like definitely 40 plus both games, right? And and it's also about who's taking the shot and how open they are and factors like that. So it wasn't even necessarily and then the Sixers, like without Embiid, were shooting way under expected to. So the thing is that, like, when you're looking at the quality of shots and how much negative regression you're expected, a lot of it's just how much more you overperform. So like if a team shoots 55% and they're expecting 5%, there's going to be such a difference in the amount of 3-point shots that we would expect them to make, because pretty much nobody in the NBA over the course of a season is ever shooting above 50%. So yeah.
Well, we'll get into a little bit more of what you expect to see from this series going forward. But first, let's talk about our friends at BetOnline. Our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all of your sports betting needs and information. Find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NLF futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all of your sport wagering information, from live betting to playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device To learn more about the trends and the action, BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. Host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter gives fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock drafts. He's got player rankings, and he's got big boards. It's free. It's available wherever you get your podcast. Here with Simon Gerszberg from Shot Quality, discussing this Heat Sixers series. Where do you see this series going now as it turns to Philadelphia for Game 6?
It's very fascinating because in the first 4 games of the series, I actually got a little wrong when I mentioned it earlier. The Sixers were the ones that have won the quality of possession battle the first 4 games of the series with Embiid back, but Game 5 was the first game that flipped. And to be honest, I know I'm on a Heat podcast, but I think the Sixers are going to take this next game. I think they're going to come out with some fire after losing by that much. And I'd expect them to get higher quality possessions in this next game that they come out with.
So based on, if I'm hearing you right, based on what we saw in Game 5, that was a lower quality of possession that Philadelphia was typically getting in Game 5 versus what they were getting in the first 4 games. So you're expecting sort of them to go back to what they were getting in the first 4 games versus what they got in Game 5.
Exactly. So this is like a crazy stat. So in Game 2 that they got blown out, their quality of shots and the quality of possession in that game was in the 92nd percentile. So they got a ton of wide open threes. Just shots weren't falling that game. Last night, got blown out again. Their quality of possessions were in the 10th percentile. So
not good.
Totally different game. It's like depending on, are the Heat funneling them into more of the paint, or are they allowing open threes off of all 3-point attempts that they allow on their defensive end?
So based on what the Heat were trying to do last night, they were trying to take away the paint, right? And so you were talking about how shot quality and possession quality is individualized for each player on a team, and then obviously you can extrapolate that to shot quality for a team based on the individual players that they have. I don't know if you're even able to answer this question, but based on Philly's personnel, is there better shot quality at the basket, considering that they have Joel Embiid and James Harden and these guys and Tyrese Maxey, who's a good finisher, and things like that? And so that's why Miami is trying to block off the paint and say, you know what, if Niang and Danny Green at 50 years old are going to beat us from 3-point range, then so be it.
It's interesting. So to be completely honest, the Sixers over the course of the season have had some of the best actual quality possessions in the half court and transition, just having Harden for half the year, having Embiid.
Right.
Their paint offense ranks 5th and finishing around the rim in terms of quality of shots. And it's around like 6% higher than catch and shoot looks and like 25% higher than the off the dribble threes, even though it's guys like Harden and Maxey who are pretty good off the dribble 3-point shooters, but still worse shots than the shots around the paint when Embiid's taking it. So that does make sense actually from a methodology standpoint. It's just funny because I mean, to be like the Sixers offense is just really, really good. So it's like, it's such a negligible difference, obviously impactful for sure.
Yeah. Well, this is why I was telling Heat fans after games 3 and 4, and they're like, well, if we just make a normal amount of our threes, then we might have swept the Sixers in this series. And I kept saying, look, the Sixers could have said the same thing after games 1 and 2. Yeah. If they would have made a normal amount of threes, then maybe they steal one in Miami or whatever it is. And the series looks different in that way. And so it is a little bit of a make or miss thing, but we're talking about just sort of the methodology here and what it is that Eric Spoelstra is doing from an X's and O's standpoint, what Doc Rivers is doing schematically. And there's a lot of interesting things that are going into this series. And so I said, even after the first 4 games, which were so, one way or the other, it was one team making like 50% of their threes and the other team making none of them in all those first 4 games. I said, that doesn't necessarily mean that the rest of the series is going to be this way. And there's a lot of fascinating X's and O's things still at play here. Anything else from this Heat Sixers series that stands out to you?
I'd say the biggest thing for me is just how the Heat are going to control the turnover battle in the game. Because during the regular season, they really were not great in terms of not turning the ball over. And against the Sixers, Like that is usually like when I'm checking the box score, watching the game to figure out like what the shot call to be with that before it comes out, before the algorithm actually outputs. The two things I look at, point percentages for both teams, who's missing the threes, like are they the best shooter on the team is missing it, and the free throws and the turnovers is always the biggest thing. So seeing who's going to win the turnover battle tomorrow night, that's a major reason because the Heat won the turnover battle last night, which was a major reason they won the quality of possession battle in that game versus the other two games where the first two games of series where they lost it. So that'll be the one thing that I'm really, really going to hone in on while watching this series, the rest as it plays out.
According to your model, in the entire NBA playoffs, which team is getting the best shot quality?
Right now, it is currently the Grizzlies were just off the charts. But now, obviously, with the jaw injury, that really hurts them. But the way the quality of possessions they were getting in the Timberwolves series, they were like dominating. Like there was one game where it was like basically went down to like the last shot and they were expected to win the game like 99% of the time just because they were getting incredible open threes for Desmond Bane. Ja was just killing it in transition. And they were looking really, really good. Obviously, that's not the case now. Right now, the top three teams in terms of quality of possessions on both ends. Grizzlies are still there currently if we factor in the Timberwolves series. Without Ja, probably a different story. And then the Bucks, Sixers, and Warriors are the other top four.
And then for Jimmy Butler, again, I don't know if you have this data just relatively available, so I'm sorry if you don't. But his shot quality, Jimmy Butler's shot quality in this series and in the playoffs. I mean, people have been saying, he might be arguably the best player in the playoffs right now, based on just what he's doing from a two-way impact standpoint. Where's Jimmy Butler at according to your model?
Just the fact that he gets to the line so much is why the model loves him so much. I mean, he pretty much only takes good shots. So in the last 4 games of the series, basically there's only been one game where his quality of possessions were under the 50th percentile. First game of the series where he had 15 points. The other 4 games of the series, it's been 70 percentile or above. And he's obviously been producing a significant amount as well. He hasn't taken, we have this stat which basically says how many bad shots you take. So in the 33rd percentile or below, it's just like for them. So for example, maybe like for Jimmy, a bad shot might be an off the dribble 3 or a catch and shoot. It's different from the average player, but that's kind of how the model works, is because it's individualized for that player. So Jimmy hasn't had a game where he took more than 6 bad shots in this series, which is a pretty good rate compared to how many shots and possessions he obviously gets on the court. So he's been really, really dominant, and obviously the model thinks he's obviously incredible as he is.
Well, it's one of those situations, obviously, where the analytics and the eye test just sort of match, right? It's like, wow, this guy's been really dominant. And then the analytics is like, yep, he's been really dominant. You're exactly right. I want to talk a little bit more about your analytics here in a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by RockAuto. With the ever-increasing number of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all of the parts you need. Why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when using RockAuto. Why would you choose to spend 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same part from a chain store or car dealership when you can go to rockauto.com? RockAuto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for more than 20 years, and their prices are reliably low for every customer, and they have everything you can need: brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website and find the solution for your auto part needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck, and then write "Locked On" in their "How did you hear about us" box so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. It's rockauto.com. Okay, back here with Locked On Heat. Thank you for making us your first listen every day. Joined now by Simon Gerszberg from Shot Quality. So based on your model, have you gotten, and I ask this because I find that in the analytics, the basketball analytics community seems to be really excited about anything that is kind of new and interesting and seems to be a good product in the ways that yours is. But have you gotten any pushback on your shot quality model?
I have not. I mean, like, obviously you get comments on Twitter and people getting mad. But pretty much anybody that has like any, like, obviously I can't give up too much of the secret sauce, like when people are
Sure.
getting mad at me at Twitter. But a lot of times what I'll do, if anybody like is bothered by the output of the model, like I'll just DM explain specifically like why this is happening. And the most important thing to me about the transparency with the model is we have this thing after the game, which is called like the luck description, which basically explains the exact reason for the variance of the shot quality and the actual results.
Mhm.
So the reason that there was a 30-point difference between what the Heat scored and what they were expected to score was because they were expected to score 21 less points on threes. I'm making up an example here, but
Yeah.
and 8 less points on finishes around the hoop, 3 more on free throws, and 4 less on mid range. And it basically explains it from a structural standpoint of what shot attempts and shot types that they took and how much they overperformed or underperformed in the game.
So what is sort of the most misunderstood thing when you start running into those kinds of conversations about shot quality or analytics in general or whatever it is that you're trying to explain?
I think the part that bothers me when people don't pick up on is the fact that it's individualized, because there are other like shot quality metrics out there. But I'm almost 100% positive we're the only one that's actually individualizing for the player that's taking the shot.
Mhm.
So that obviously is like the most important thing to me, because there's such a significant difference between Duncan Robinson taking an open catch and shoot three and Jimmy Butler taking an open catch. I mean, Jimmy Butler obviously could be a good three-point shooter if he really wanted to be, but there
Right.
is a significant difference of that. Uh, and I just think it's so important that our data like captures that accurately as we move along.
Yeah. And so obviously you're doing, a podcast now, you're on Twitter, you've got the graphics, you got all that fun stuff, but you were talking earlier about how, you'll work with players, coaches, teams, etc. What's sort of been the response by that community to this stuff?
Totally. So, to be completely honest, my passion has always been like since I was in high school. Uh, been in analytics. I was obsessed with baseball analytics for a little while, then moved into basketball. Uh, my passion's always been like trying to help coaches win more games, which is what I was doing for the Colgate team. And then once I actually had the data, extrapolating it to all these other teams that signed up for shot clock. So we have 60 plus Division I teams signed up with us. Product is definitely like my favorite. It's what really drives what I do. Uh, and obviously, I really, really enjoy. There's some other stuff with the business I do not enjoy as much, but I guess I'm gonna have to keep doing that as shot quality keeps growing.
Yeah. Sometimes just making the product is the best part when you're in sort of some kind of a creative kind of environment. And then you're like, oh,
Exactly.
wait, this is also a business and I have to do other things that are boring. I totally hear you on that. That's what we do on the podcast. So, so, all right, who's your dream client right now? Either from a standpoint of like, it could be a player, a team coach, whatever. You can take it any direction. Either, hey, this is a player or a coach that could really, really use this product, or maybe somebody that is just kind of already buying into shot quality, and you would just love to work with that person in regards to your product. I don't know. You could just start open ended. Take it anywhere you want to go.
Easiest question I've ever received. It's got to be the Knicks. It's got to be the Knicks. The shot selection improved from last year to this year. The home team obviously would do anything to do so. Most right now, like a lot of our analytics isn't really for NBA like actual coaching staffs.
Yeah.
But moving forward, we're going to be doing a lot of like stuff with front offices, especially as our data streams get more and more accurate and more precise with like whatever we end up implementing. So I could see that being like a major thing moving forward, and obviously to work with the team that I grew up watching every game of would be like the most like incredible thing for me, I think.
That would be neat. Simon, thanks for joining the show. Can you please tell our listeners where they could find you, what you've got cooking up, and anything else you want to plug?
Totally. Yeah, you can just find me at shot_quality. We'll be posting a lot of content as the playoffs roll around. Hopefully the Heat make the NBA Finals. I know I'm talking to a pretty select audience here, so I got to.
There you go, pandering.
Yeah,
You already blew it by telling them
pandering
you're a
hard
Knicks
here.
fan, but they see right through this. But that's all right.
Damn it. But yeah, you can just find me at shot_quality.
Awesome. Well, that'll do it for us today. Remember to like and subscribe to Locked On Heat on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Comment and leave a 5-star rating. Reach us on Twitter at Locked On Heat. Thank you for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NBA every Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free. It's available wherever you get your podcasts.